Okay, so for Lab 5, we're actually going to be working with our VC or vCenter. First thing I want to point out is make sure that our network adapter is on VM network 8. I'm going to go ahead and skip a step, and I'm going to add in an additional NIC. And I'm going to put that on VNet 3. This is going to be our iSCSI. I don't want to have to worry about restarting or anything. It's a lot easier just to do it. Notice it says VNet 3 here, but not over here. Workstation sometimes will show one thing on this side and a different thing on this side. So you want to make sure that they do line up. Like VMnet 8 versus VMnet 0. So you do want to make sure that you pay attention to both sides. From there, we're going to go ahead and power it on. Again, you might get some prompts about your floppy drive, about USB devices, things like that. Because this was one of the cloned machines, we're going to have to worry about our mini setup, which is just going to be our initial startup phase and wizard, which same thing we had to do on our domain controller. It will set up its services, install its basic devices, and this can take anywhere between a few minutes and 20 minutes. Okay, so that took about 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and navigate through the basic setup, which is again our lab environment. So don't worry about serial numbers, except the license terms. Pretty straightforward. Again, Alt-Control Insert, not delete. They let us log in. My password should expire. We're going to make sure that we're doing our classroom password. Password should be changed. Once it prepares our desktop, I'm going to be changing its name, setting the static addresses, then restarting. Because you'll notice that the name is one of those weird names. I'm going to put the description vc or vita.local, and I'm going to go ahead and change the name to VC. Not going to worry about our domain just yet, because I want the name VC to be applied before we join the domain. So a quick restart will fix that. I'm going to restart later because I do want to change the network settings first. Notice that we have two network adapters. One was for our VNet 8, one is for our VNet 3. How you can tell is by looking at its details. The one on VNet 8 is in the 192.168.246 network, and that is that one. So I'm going to go ahead and change the IPv4 settings like it has in our lab document, which is 192.168.246. Our DC is 19. Our ESXi 1 and 2 are 20 and 21, so our vCenter will be 20. 255.255.255.0 is our appropriate subnet mask. Our default gateway is 2, and our preferred DNS is our domain controller. Again, we're going to click on Advanced, double check all of that is the correct information, and this time go to Wins, insert our WINS information, and make sure to enable NetBIOS over TCP/IP. Because our WINS server is on 19, 19 is also our DNS server, 19 is also our domain controller. Go ahead and click OK to all of that. I'm going to ignore the security essentials warning for right now, but we have this second adapter. So what network does this belong to? You'll notice it's 192.168.3 dot something. The 3 denotes that it's in the iSCSI network. So I'm going to go ahead before I restart. Our lab document has us change this address to 20. Remember that this is going to be for our iSCSI, so no gateway and no DNS is required. Just so I know what it is, I'm going to go ahead and change the name to iSCSI. So now that the name has been reconfigured and the network's been reconfigured, I'm going to go ahead and restart so I can finish the rest of this lab. Now that our VM has been restarted, it's going to have us add 2 additional disks for our iSCSI. So I'm actually going to navigate to our VC, or right click on it, navigate to settings. I want to add in 2 additional hard drives, hard disks. We're going to create a new virtual disk. Because the machine is obviously powered on, it's going to be installing an iSCSI disk, and that's okay. Our lab environment says put them 35 gigs, and I'm going to store it as a single file. The name, however, is very specific. We're going to call the first one SCSI 1. And we're going to add in another one, same size. We're going to store it as a single disk, and we're going to call this one SCSI 2. I did not make the pre-allocate the space on both of these because the allocation process takes so long that I just left them thin provisioned. However, depending on your lab environment, you may have to pre-allocate or not. It kind of depends. And that's it. I clicked OK. Let's go ahead and log into our server now. I'm logging in as administrator with the normal password we have. One thing that the lab does want us to make sure that we do is we're going to add a role. It wants us to add the file server role. So, file services. This just gives you a brief little nutshell on file services. More specifically, it wants us to do the service for network file system. That's the one that we need to make sure that is checked. And install. The installation process shouldn't take very long. Once that is complete, it will show you that it's been successfully completed. We're going to go ahead and create a new folder. We're going to place it on C drive. New folder, NFS. Alright, so this is important. It needs to be capitalized because we're going to be going between different types of operating systems. NFS, it has to be all capitalized. One of the major reasons why it has to be capitalized is because we're using some Linux machines, and Linux is very case sensitive. So once we have our new NFS folder, we're going to highlight it, right click on it, go to Properties, and now we'll see a new NFS Share tab. We're going to go ahead and share using NSF. So once you click on the tab, you should see this Manage NFS Sharing. We're going to go ahead and share this folder. We're sharing it as NFS. All of this should be pretty default. We want to go ahead and go to its permissions. Type of access, we want to change it to read and write. And we also want to allow root access. And apply. Okay. And close. Now that is going to be shared. Once we've done that, we're going to go navigate into it. We're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it ISOs. And another one called Utilities. Or Utils for short. So once both of them are there, we're going to go ahead and join this server to the vita.local domain. Then ignore the security essentials, because again, this is just a lab environment, so that's fine. So back on our initial configuration task list, it has our address and information, and that's all correct. Our PC name is now VC, but the work group, we want to change the work group. Provide computer name and domain. We're going to click on change name. We're going to be joining this to our vita.local domain. It should prompt you. If it doesn't prompt you, double check your IP information and the DNS settings. The account we're going to be using is administrator with our default password of password with a capital P and a $sign. What it's doing right now is it's contacting our domain controller, verifying their credentials, and then it will send back a approved or deny. As long as DNS is functioning, it should allow us to join. However, if it said it could not contact that domain, verify that the domain controller is on. If the domain controller is on, verify your network settings. Also try pinging the addresses, verifying all of the NICs are the correct NICs. If you're not sure how to do that, double check our networking documentation from Lab 1. Now that I'm part of the domain, it's going to make me restart. So I'm going to go ahead and restart now. Okay, now that the PC is restarted, you'll see that it is now VC-administrator. We don't want to log on to the local account, so we're going to go ahead and type in our domain account. Helps if I click on switch users first. I want to log into our Vita domain. If it doesn't say Vita down there, try logging in Vita / and a domain user, which is, right now it should just be administrator, and whatever password you have. While this is doing that, our last step is actually installing our Vcenter Server software. Double check the addressing is correct, double check that you're part of the domain, and if that is all correct, we're done with our initial configuration wizard. The last thing that we have to do is mount the disk for our Vmware Vcenter Server. So we're going to go ahead and navigate outside of our virtual machine, right click on our VC virtual machine, and go to removable devices. Go down to CD and DVD optical drives and go to settings. We want to mount an ISO and go ahead and browse. For me, my ISOs are again stored on C drive ISOs. We're not going to use the VMware Visor, that's ESXi. We actually want our VIM setup. This is going to be our VMware Manager. Notice its size is about 3.5 gigs, and that's what we're going to mount. Once it's there, go ahead and click on OK. Takes a second or two for the VM to recognize it's been mounted, but it will populate. If it doesn't populate, you can always browse inside your virtual machine to computer. And there it is. Go ahead and run it. The lab has us install them individually. However, I'm just going to do a simple install. I just wasn't patient enough. There's the pop-up from the disk. I'm just going to exit out. I'm just going to do a simple install. Click on install, and it's going to walk us through each one of these one by one. And I'm choosing the defaults. The first one is single sign-on. I'm accepting the user license. It's going to double check all of our information. And once you verify that's all the correct info, go and hit next. Our password here for our single sign-on administrator. So this is going to be our default administrator account to log in. Our lab has us change it from our standard default password of password with a capital P and $sign to password with a capital P, $sign, and 1. This is to denote that this is a separate domain with a separate user. When you install single sign-on, you will always have a local administrator account with the vsphere.local domain. That way, if there's ever an issue, you still have this account. If it cannot contact your domain controller, for example, it can always authenticate using this account. You do want to make sure to have this as a strong password though. So once you're ready, go and hit next. Leave all the defaults unless you want to name it. Here, I'm just going to leave it default for site, but normally you'd want to name this something intuitive. Leave all the ports, but do take note of these ports because they will become important on the exam and if we're going to do any type of firewall rules. So you do want to see what ports are there. It's going to ask you where do you want to install it. Again, we're leaving all the defaults. You have a basic view. So, because we're doing a nested virtual machine, you may get VMware has stopped running the script. The reason behind this is, if you look at your performance, when this happens, your performance skyrockets. And so it stops allowing it to run. However, you want to click no on this. Because again, we're doing nested virtual machines, this will run a little slow. It's okay. Click no, and it'll be okay. It will look like it's frozen, but it's not. It will pick back up. If it doesn't pick back up, minimize what's on your screen because sometimes it's in the background. Double check the settings just to make sure. When you're ready to install, go ahead and click on install. I'm going to have to keep Microsoft Security Essentials will keep popping up, so I'm just going to ignore that. And now it's just time. The nice thing with the simple setup is when it's ready, it just goes right into the next one. You may get a hash for the web client. Go ahead and accept it. Because these are all going to be used internally, we don't have a PKI setup, and that means we're not going to be doing anything with certificates. So we're going to go ahead and accept all of our internal self-signed certificates. In a production environment, you probably wouldn't do this, but in our lab environment, it's okay. This setup is just like the other one, just we're going with our default options, and if you get a script run error, just be patient. Don't click on yes to kill the task, just click on no, and again, just be patient. After our single sign-on, after our web client, we will get to our VMware inventory service, and again, just be patient, and it will auto-install. If it prompts you for anything, we're just choosing our default options for now. We're going to be configuring this through additional labs. That's why our default options are appropriate for now. The last one is our Vcenter Server. This is the most important. You may get a few errors with this one. Most notably, it has to be able to download a few items from the internet. So if the network options are not set up correctly, you'll get a few errors for that. Also, if you try doing this on the domain controller, Vcenter no longer allows you to install it on a domain controller. Other than that, again, we're just letting it do its thing, and we're choosing our default options. The difference with our vCenter is it needs a license key, and without a license key, it's going to be installed in evaluation mode, and that's okay for now. We actually have a later lab configuring our serial keys. You could also check our announcement page to get the serial key for Vcenter Server. For now, I'm just going to choose evaluation mode and click on next. I want to install SQL 2008 Express. If we're having a large scale deployment, we might actually want to do our own database, but we are not, so we're just going to use our Express. We're going to use just a local account, our administrator account on our vcvita.local, because that's the account that we're currently logged into. That's okay. That way, it will use this account to log in as a service to launch our vCenter service. You want to make sure our domain is correct, and it is. Here's the ports that you would like to at least take note of, because if we are turning on the firewall, we may have to unblock all of these ports, and it's also important to know because these are all exam questions. Next, it's going to ask how much memory you're going to dedicate. If you're going between a few hundred hosts, these are the physical ESXi machines running that many virtual machines. You choose the most appropriate. We're only having 2 ESXi hosts and maybe a handful of virtual machines, so a small inventory size is appropriate. In a large business, you may have more. You could enable data collection, and that will be sent back to VMware. I don't, but it's up to you. And with that, click install. You may notice that it's going to ask you for our certificate again. That's okay. Go and accept the self-signed certificate. The installation of vCenter, this one is a very slow installation. Because it has to install SQL Server 2008 Express, you'll see it flashing back and forth between the installation and the prompts for SQL Server. Again, we don't have to do any interaction with this. Just let it do its setup, and yeah. One of the major prompts that you may get will be our Windows security fire alarm, firewall alert, not fire alarm. Go ahead and make sure that you have domain network, and make sure to set it as a workplace. So go ahead and allow access. I think out of the entire installation process, after I clicked installed, that was the only prompt that I got. And once it is complete, it will prompt you with a finish command. You may get a few of these, that's okay, just again be patient. So the last thing that we are looking for is the installation package for single sign-on, web client, inventory, and vCenter has completed successfully. Once we see that, this lab is complete. I'm going to click OK and power down.